Hello and good morning friends, welcome to the CEC Reset live lecture. Dear friends, as you know that from time to time we talk on different subjects, and under these subjects we try to cater to your needs, and sometimes we try to give you a deep insight into a very particular topic. For all the students of women's studies, I would like to tell you all that, dear friends, today we are specifically going to talk on women and education in India. We are going to get the insight into how women is moving forward and how she is getting education, how she is excelling. And for this we have again with us in our studios Professor Sushila Kaushik. Professor Kaushik is retired professor from Delhi University. Professor Kaushik frequently carry out various workshops, seminars. She participates in various conferences as well as seminars and workshops, and there with the help of her knowledge, with the help of her experiences, she tries to disseminate knowledge, share knowledge. So dear friends, let's take advantages from her experiences and let's try to get more and more knowledge through her. So without wasting any time, I would like to welcome our guest, Professor Sushila Kaushik. Professor Kaushik, welcome to the EduSet lecture.
Thank you.
So today we are going to talk on education and women in India. So ma'am, I would like you to explain us in detail by giving various facts as you usually do with the help of these EduSet lectures.
I'll try. Thank you so much. We will move into, we have been talking about women's studies and a lot of issues concerning women in the various lectures we have had before. Now I thought we can move into some of the specific areas in which there is concern about the women's participation and women's role and how they are necessary for women's development. So one of these things we will take up today is education. Now education again can be divided as we do into primary, secondary and higher education. And in higher education, we again go into quite a lot about the professional education these days, vocational and professional education. So today we will only deal with the elementary and primary education sort of information. We will take up in a subsequent one on the higher education as well as the professional educations streams. Taking up education as a whole, we do believe that very often when education, especially at the elementary level, is being talked about, whether it's policy makers or even academics or administrators, talk very about the literacy rate of India. Often it is believed that just giving the figures about literacy or improving the literacy figures for women over a period of time is considered by itself as enough to talk about the education of women in India or girls in India. This is not true. This is a very minor part of the entire educational development of India, the need for the educational development of women in India. So that is where many of educationists adopt various approaches as to why education is an important concern in women's development as such. One of the most important reasons why we would like to have more of education is because we believe it is essential for any human being, any thinking being, and definitely girls and women are thinking beings and human beings. This is a part of our human rights as such. As a human right, every person who is born has a right to enrich themselves and encourage themselves and learn more. That is one of the important human rights we have. So denial of education is considered as a denial of human rights. So after we have signed the Human Rights Convention or even before, it has been felt very seriously that denial of human rights is to women is bad. So that's why as early as 1918, even when we were still going through the independence movement in this country and the freedom struggle started in serious form, there were many women advocates who started education for women. There are two important associations which came up. One is the All India Women's Conference, the other is National Council of Education, National Council of Women, and the very eminent personalities in the leadership like Annie Besant, Norman Cousins, who really made this as their one-point program to spread education among girls in this country. Practically, there was very little education before this period. Why they thought of it is essentially because it is not merely a right of education, but also it leads to tremendous amount of self-empowerment for women. Women being denied education, definitely there were many who were strong enough, but still by and large it gives a very low self-image, and women do feel diffident, women do feel incompetent when they see the men or when they see even events and developments outside. And really what happened during that time was the Indian national movement was moving very forward. Men were all participating in it and men were talking about it, discussing it, but the women could not equally participate with their men in discussing or understanding the leadership, the content and the aims and the goals of the Indian independence movement. So, the women need to be brought along the same level of knowledge and confidence. So, many of these people believed, the Indian women leaders believed that women should be educated so that they also can participate in the national movement with a lot of understanding, knowledge and move forward into leadership roles in the Indian national movement. So, this started at that time, but we still believe that education is a very important tool for self-confidence. Because when we see many women who older age group particularly, who have never been educated, there is a certain amount of diffidence they do have in communicating or in understanding things. I am not going to details of it, but they say that something like they cannot count the money, they cannot keep the accounts, they cannot see the bus number, they find every time they have to ask somebody, get the help of others. So, they become very dependent on others. Particularly they become very dependent on their own men, and those who are all in very professional activities or any type of earning activities, they are all the time feeling diffident, they are being cheated or they may be cheated when it comes to payment of wages, salaries and other things. So, I think there should be a certain amount of increased self-image and self-confidence which definitely education gives them. It does not mean that those who do not go to school are not educated, but definitely going to school and becoming literate is a necessity for them. The second way in which we approach education or why it is needed for men and women, definitely for women, is the socio-political and cultural approach. That is from the society's point of view. The politics point of view, we do want to have more and more educated women. It is good for the progress of the society. It is good for the participation of the 50% of the population of the country. It is good for them to participate in the politics of the country, and more we find even some of the states and they come out with things like only educated people can contest elections, only educated people can have right to vote and things like this. In fact, many countries before us adopted this approach, a very selective type of voting and suffrage. So, only those who are educated up to a particular level can have the right to vote. Of course, India did not follow that. We did believe that everybody should participate, and participating in politics itself is a way of educating the people. And this is particularly true for the women in this country, who by and large were not educated by the time we became democracy and had the first election. We have seen before that Nehru was the first one who argued for universal adult suffrage. So, anybody who is above the age of 21 has to have the right to vote, whatever may be the educational qualification. This favored the women in particular, because they were the ones who were most uneducated at that point. Even recently we found one of the states in India, Rajasthan, has passed a legislation that only those who have passed higher secondary or secondary exam can have the right to stand as a candidate in the panchayat elections in Rajasthan. I am not getting into the details of it, I am not so sure it is a very right measure, but at the same time what it points out is that education is a definite fundamental requisite if one has to participate very keenly with a knowledge, with understanding, and not be dependent on others, or not be controlled and overruled by the men, either in the panchayats or in the family or in the community. So, with the result, it is a good measure that we do have persons who are educated at least up to a particular level, but making it compulsory and thereby denying a bulk of the people is another issue. And still another issue is it will be essentially the women who will be deprived of it, because the men's figure is still higher, the women's figure especially in Rajasthan is still very low, as we will see little later. 34% is only the literacy rate of women in Rajasthan, which means 66% of women still do not have any education, and that means they are denied the right to go and vote in the election, or denied the right to stand in panchayats. So, this is where education just become important, and it has political implications, political consequences. So, this is an approach where we are not worried about the literacy as such, but we are worried about the political knowledge and understanding and the participation decision making processes of the country. So, literacy is very closely related to governance. Particularly these days, the governance has become so technical, administration has become so technological, and at least a certain amount of literacy, if it is not there, we will find it very difficult to participate in the various events and developments in the country. So, governance requires definitely literacy, and one of the reasons there is a very low figure of women either in the administration or in the government or in parliament or in the legislatures of the various states of India is mainly because of this low level of literacy. So, while panchayats are dealing with this, still we find it has a socio-political implication, it has a cultural implication. With the result, we would like to have literacy, and perhaps even more than mere literacy, knowledge, information, technology, technical input, so that the women can participate equally with a certain amount of ability, confidence and efficiency in the various public approaches they have, public spaces they have. The third important reason why they say is economic empowerment approach. Namely, most of the women are employed. It is not true that women are not employed, but most of the women are employed in this country in the unorganized sector and in the agricultural sector, where perhaps you do not require so much a literacy as much as a skill, and women do have skills. Women do have, they have inherited the skills, they have been trained in the skills by family, and so they are all participating in very many unorganized activities. But as I said before, this does not make them immediately economically empowered, because they become dependent on others, their skills are being manipulated and exploited, the money they earn does not come into their hands, it comes through others and gets spent off the way. So, ultimately they are the ones who are being exploited further in this entire process. And very often we also hear that men are ready to employ. So, many of these private sector under unorganized sector owners are ready to employ women and children, not so much of their skills alone, but also because they can pay them less. They can pay them less than they pay the men, and the women will not oppose, women will not fight, they will take whatever is given, they will go home, otherwise they will be thrown out. So, this is an exploitation which we can try to get rid of if the women are aware of what are their wage levels, what is it they are supposed to get, whether they are getting that, and how to keep accounts. In many ways, we will see later on, like in BD rolling and many things, women do all the work, but the men take it to the market, and what happens to, there is a big disproportionate between what women get at the end of it and what they have contributed really by way of their labor. So, many of these things require a certain amount of economic calculations and a certain amount of mental ability and a confidence which the women should have. And without having enough of a literate qualification, it is also difficult to make the women develop in their skills. A lot of skills are at present which the women are doing is very low technical skills, very low level of skills. So, the wages they get is also very low. The type of jobs they get is also very low skilled jobs. They do not require any skill. So they have employed the women. But if the women get more and more skills and becoming particularly technically a little more advanced, they can also go for a higher type of skills and higher type of jobs where higher skills are required, particularly the technical skills, like even a computer, typing, whatever we have, those are getting better rewards than if they didn't have it and if they work as a very low level helpers. So, from a helper to move on to an office person, they definitely will require a skill development. So, these are various approaches which we normally take, but then there is a fourth approach, that is where this is from the point of view of ideology of liberty and equality. We now believe, and our own National Policy of Education of 1986 clearly says under the Women's Education title that education is a necessity for equality. It is not merely education for all these various purposes, we saw practical purposes, but it is also necessary for the ideological purposes, namely one of bringing about equality in the society. So, it is education for equality. It is not merely women's education, but also education about women, so that the equality concept will come up. So, we will talk about it later, but right now at present it is more education for women will bring more equality for women in the society. More different type of education which we will have will bring more equality by also informing the men about women's rights and women's equality. That is why the 1956 policy talks very gloriously about, very beautiful sections it has on education for women's equality, where it believes that it should be a social engineering project which brings the change in the society as such. So, the education thereby becomes a very important field, particularly for women, particularly at the even at the literacy level. So, we are not talking very high about other things, but right now we are only talking about even at the low level, because we are still having to deal with those problems. And unless we deal with the primary and lower level of education, we cannot go about talking about a higher education or professional education, which requires even further advancement for the women as such. So, taking the present situation, where are we right now? When we became independent in 1947 and they had the first census in 1951, the figures which came out was that generally the literacy rate was below par, but the women's education, women's literacy rate was even much worse. It was only 9%. Only 9% of the Indian women were even literate. So, that was a very low figure which we had, mainly because of perhaps the freedom struggle, independent movement, foreigners ruling and many other cultural, social factors which we had inherited. From this 9%, we really needed to bring the women up as literates to almost 100% or at least equally according to their proportion in the population as such. So, over a period of time, a lot of people worked on women's education. The nation paid attention to the literacy of women as such. So, as I said before, even during the independent movement, there has been a certain amount of awareness that women's literacy was very bad. In 1935 or so, during the Indian national movement, Sucheta Kriplani prepared even a draft outline on women's education as such, though it couldn't be taken up because many other things came up in the political front, so it got sort of subsumed by them. But the concern was continuing and very much present. So, we paid attention even by our first after the independence. So, we had figures which were very bad. From there we came up and up and up. So, we came to a figure of in 1951 only 9% when we became independent, and moved up to in 1997, this is almost of course half a century, we brought the women's literacy to 50%. Even that is not right, because that means 50% of women are not yet literate, which is a very high figure in India with the population being what it is. We worked further on that. So, by 2001, the literary figures went up a little more to 53.7 of women in this country, but the general literary figures also went up to 66.4. Obviously, the men's education got little more prominence than the women's education. The latest census which we have is 2011. In 2011, the male literacy has gone up to 82.1, but the female literacy went up only up to 65.5. Though the Indian literacy rate itself went to 73.8, that is a plus figure of almost 10% in the past 10 years. The women's literacy also went up by about 11.8% from the last census period 2001, but the gap between the women's education, men's education continued to remain as quite a big figure, and even though we've improved, it still we found, as you know now, 35% of Indian women are still not literate. After 2011 even, our situation is still not so satisfactory. The very many other countries which came up much later than us or along with us became independent, like China, like Vietnam, they are all smaller countries with less resources, they all have become 100%. Many countries in the world has moved much faster than we have done, except a couple of countries in Africa. The rest have all moved very forward. But somehow the South Asian continent is such, Pakistan, India, Nepal, where the figures of literacy of women is extremely low. Of course, Sri Lanka is an exception, extremely good figure, almost 100% literacy in general and also for women, but not in our countries as such. So, there is a lot of stuff we still will have to do by way of improving the literacy. If we go further into our various subsections in the Indian population like SC and ST, the figures are even worse. And there, of course, there is a movement, there is a lot of change, mainly because of our government policies, we will take it up a little later. But even then, we find even SC and ST, there is still a lot of gap in women's literacy, and still about 45 to 50% of the people are not at education. Actually, what you find is age group wise is the older generation which is bringing the figures down. The younger generations definitely are going to school, but the older people not going to school anymore, they are the ones who are bringing the whole figures down. With the result, the data which we are giving is not really very happy picture which we still have. We must work a lot more. And we also find in the present scene, there are states in India which are very advanced. There are states in India which still haven't realized the need for women's education. Kerala, which is anyway advanced in educational literacy even for men, there's average is 95% in Kerala, in certain states like Ernakulam, where we have already reached the universal literacy rate. In general, Kerala definitely has much higher rate. The women's education is also 95%. Only that means the little gap which the Kerala still has comes from the women's side. So, if we remove this gap of 95 and make it into 100, then Kerala would have really achieved 100 in all its districts. The other state which is even better than Kerala is Mizoram, where the education is 100% almost, and where the women's education is 98%, which means literally there is very few women who are not educated, maybe very old people or something like that. But in contrast, you have states, Rajasthan, only 34% is the literacy rate for women, Bihar 35%, very close is to Rajasthan, Orissa 38%, still not literate. Madhya Pradesh is low figure, Andhra is a low figure, they are all in their 40s, UP. So, these are the backward states, we seem to be backward here too, in education too. So, we can see the connections later, but right now we find that there is big variation in India between the various states. So, geography makes difference. There is also big variation by way of rural urban difference. More and more women are illiterate or not literate in the rural side of India. The urban figures are slightly better. So also between communities. The general community figures is not good, but then the figures of minority community is even worse. SC used to be like very few literate person. ST used to be very few literate person. But the ST figures have gone up mainly because there are a lot of states in the northeast. There are 7 to 8 states in the northeast which are highly populated with tribal population, where the literacy figures are nearly 100%, as in Nagaland, as in Mizoram. So, they really lift up the tribal figures. So, you do have 73.1% among the STs, but it is not evenly distributed all over India. So, the tribal belts, tribal areas within the other states is still hilly areas, which is very bad. For instance, Orissa, which has 2/3 of tribal population, the figures are brought down mainly because of the illiteracy among the tribal population, the rural population. So, the development which has taken place over a period of time, though not bad, at least 11% more, is not evenly distributed in all states and all regions of India. There is still a big diversity or big divergence gap in the education as such. So, to remove these things, as I said from the very beginning, there is a certain concern about women's education, girls' education. We put it in the constitution itself. In fact, the Constitution of India, which came into being in 1950, has in the directive principles of state policy mentioned that free and compulsory education till the age of 14 will be provided by all the states in India. Because education was a state subject, it was not a center subject at that point, though now it has become a concurrent subject. So, both center as well as the states can do a lot of good in that sphere. But at that point, it was put as part of the state's mandate that before the age of 14, all the kids in our country should have had education. In order to make it possible, education should be made free. In order to make it possible, education should be made compulsory, so that no parent will keep the child home. But then, since it is only a directive principle, over a period of time we could not really enforce it. Certain states did it. Kerala again was one which gives free education up to 12th class in all schools. Now, many other states have followed the Kerala model. Now, they are giving free education, particularly for girls till the age of 14 or till high school. But even then, we do not seem to have the 100% literacy. Compulsory, we are not able to enforce in this country because it will mean a lot of side effects, which is very difficult, and it will become inhumane in most of the cases. So, one is not attempting a compulsory mandatory type of approach. Still, one tries to persuade people to send the children to school. Then by 2010, when we found that we still have not really got universal education, the UNESCO started a program particularly for the African and other countries, but we also fell in that gap, education for all program. But even then, following that, India adopted the universal education policy by 2010 and began looking into what all they have to do in order to bring it about. Obviously, we have not succeeded to bring universal education still there. So, with the result, in 2008 we began moving around to think of, or even before that, we began thinking in terms of having even by late to 1970s, 78, during the Janta period, a lot of proposals were formulated, and then we talked in terms of making education as a constitutional right. Because all this time we have not had any mandatory part of it. We have not made anybody firmly in charge of education, though we try to make all our ministries, administration to move around. So, this proposal started even by 1978, but finally by 2008 we succeeded in amending our constitution and making this education a fundamental right fundamental right to education and put it into the constitution. This is called 83rd Amendment. And so that from the directive principles of state policy, where it remained as a principle and a noble aim, it now has become a mandatory on the part of the state to enforce and bring about education of all by this particular constitution. And so people can go to court if there is no facility, if there is other support mechanisms are needed. The right to education is a very important landmark for us in the educational field that we adopted this. One will have to see whether this has proved good by the end of next census, which is 2021. Maybe the figures for education will be very high, and a lot of NGOs, lot of organizations began operating at the ground level about education for the poor, education for the remote, education for the deprived, and they also began talking in terms of alternate education, different types of education, things like that began working. We had some very powerful organizations which came up all over India to do experimentation with elementary education and working on the ground by methods other than these formal methods to bring about education for all the children, deprived children particularly. And they also come out with surveys, monitoring, and keep telling us how many are able to go to school even now. But what we are talking is essentially enrollment. What we are talking here essentially is the sending to school, and the literacy figures is being calculated on the basis of enrollment in the schools. The literacy rate is not being counted on the basis of either the methodology or the dropout rate or the absenteeism or the teacher's ability or the teacher's skill to impart or the content of education or how much has gone really into the head of the students, how much they have been able to imbibe. These are things which are very qualitative measurements, qualitative monitoring, which we still have not been able to get hold of, even though some organizations are doing a lot of survey all over India, like Pratham, to know whether really children who are going to school can count up to such a figure, whether they can go, they are going to classes, things like this. In fact, we have even made the education test to be optional at certain level, and in fact, we have said no test at all. So, no detention at all till the class 5. So, the test really starts only after class 5 and in some cases even after class 7. So, that no child is detained and not even past the class 5. Up to the age of 14 would mean class 8 they should be studying. So, up to the class 8 many schools and many states have said no detention for the children. This has meant two things. One, of course, we have the literacy figures which says no dropout, but there is another thing which says they are not able to get anything, they are not able to even write their names, they are not able to count anything, they are not able to recognize any words, mainly because the attention on the students imbibing the knowledge has been very little. Only having the school, having doing things is considered as enough. So, the quality of education still is a concern for us even more than as much as the quantity of education. Even within this limited ambition which we have, namely it is good enough even at least if they go to school, at least if they are there in the school, is something which we are finding very difficult. Our dropout rate is still very high, not merely in the class 10 where it is almost 50%, both for men as well, boys as well as girls. The dropout rate in the class up to class 10, if somebody studies, is 50%, but even at elementary level, elementary classes even, we have a very high rate of dropout, which means the children, particularly the girls, are not able to go to school even at the elementary level because of various factors which make them stay back at home and the parents not sending them or they not going to school as such. What are some of these factors? Once again, we have a lot of studies which have been done. A massive study was done on the girl child and family, where they try to find out why and how the children are not going to school. Why is it this literacy figures is very low, particularly in the rural and the urban slums and other places. They come out with various general conclusions. One can narrate them, go through them. Of course, the poverty is a very important feature. If you go and ask them, they say, ma'am, we are very poor, how do we send the children to school? This has become a general way of saying things, which actually poverty by itself does not anymore count, for the simple reason the schools are free, tuition is free, they are giving free boarding, free books, free notebooks, and they are also giving free uniforms, particularly for girls in rural as well as urban areas. So, poverty as such is not the reason why they are not sending them to schools, because everything is given if they go to school. But what happens is, because of poverty, there are other factors which come in, which looks not immediate, but it is true. One is the other type of work which the girls have to do, which will come later, but also the education of the parents. If the parents themselves are not educated, they are not able to value the education of the children. Many of them believe, what's the point of education when they are not getting anything later on, when they don't have employment, they won't get any wages, so no point in sending them. Particularly the father, if he is not educated. Many women who are not educated are ambitious enough that their daughters should go to school. They couldn't go, but they want the daughters to go, they know what are the problems. But the father's education, if it's poor, the girls don't get education at all in the school. This has been one of the very important findings of our study, because the patriarchy operates through the father, and it affects the girls' education. The second and the most important reason why the poor people as well as people in the lower level class do not send their children to school is because of the household chores which the girls have to perform. Children of the poorer families do have a lot of work to perform at home, like cooking, bringing water, bringing fuel, and above all taking care of the younger children, sibling care as we call, because the mothers have to work either in agriculture or in any other unorganized sector as domestic workers. They have to move out of the house. So, they leave their children to take care of the house, and girls invariably, particularly the elder girls invariably, become almost like young mothers and take care of the house and the household duties all the time. So, they have no time to go to school. The school clashes with the work they have, and the work at home is mandatory, where the schools then become optional. Then they do also a lot of serious work also. They do the burden of what we call survival tasks, bringing fuel and water. Even if the mothers bring, that is not enough, the children will have to add on to that work, cooking especially at home, shepherding. Very often when you go into rural side, the sheep or the calves or even the cows and animals are being accompanied by girls. The boys go away, the boys do it, but they also go away to work, and it is really the girls who are asked to do this. This has meant a lot of hazardous risks. Then the family occupation, like agriculture, like the unorganized sector jobs. The mother, if she is involved, then the daughters get involved. And if the mothers are involved, then the daughters have to substitute for the mothers. If the elder women get involved, then the girls look at home, sit at home and look after the house. So, and all its various duties. The result is the girls are the easily sacrificial goats, and they cannot take time off to go to school. This continues for the girls from childhood to even to a higher age group. But as we go along, other factors also begin coming up, and there you find in India the schools are quite far off. While elementary schools are right there in the villages very often, the higher secondary or middle schools are usually 4 kilometers, 5 kilometers away, and there is no transport to go there, and the boys walk or cycle themselves down, but the girls don't do that. With the result, girls are deprived of middle school and higher school. And even the schools being in the neighborhood for elementary classes is a wish which is now only now getting fulfilled. The NCRT says that we have 95% of Indian villages, the schools are there in 1 kilometer away, within 1 kilometer, which means the girls could also walk. Then when you go to schools, there is no facility available, there is no toilet, there is no water, and there is very poor sanitation. Girls definitely require privacy. Girls require more than merely privacy, particularly at this adolescent age. There are other needs women have. They have menstrual periods and other things. Then there is also security which they require. We know that a lot of girls are being raped or molested or attacked when they walk the distance from the school to the toilet, and so many girls do not even attempt to go to toilets, and so they very often stay back at home if the facilities are not good, and then most of the things provided toilets are very dry without even elementary need of water as such. You also find once you go into the classrooms, things are not that attractive. For instance, we find playgrounds and other extracurricular activities which make the school attractive and make the girls give up home and come are very often lacking for women, for girls. Playgrounds are not there. If there is any playground, the boys occupy it. Games like football, cricket, hockey are all usually given only to boys, especially football, and the girls are told either to sit inside and play carom board or whatever it is, in which the girls are not. So the sex stereotyping comes up again. Girls are again pushed indoors and they don't go and play outside. So there is no fresh oxygen, there is no health, and there is definitely no interest which the schools develop in them. And the activities as well as the syllabi also is something which the girls don't get really interested in. So the games, the other activities are also gender oriented and sex stereotyped. It just looks like an extension of the family, like cooking, tailoring. These are all extension of the family rather than alternate from the family. Then we have a big problem about schools not having teachers. There is only a single teacher schools in most of the time, and the single teacher is very often rural side of India absent. With the result, the schools go without any monitoring, and so the behavior of the boys become very rough and rude, and teachers are also taking too many classes at the same time and can't pay any attention to the discipline in the class. So the girls particularly feel affected by that. They drop off, they keep away from the school as such. So both the teachers' absenteeism and school girls' absenteeism becomes much more, and the boys come there but not so much for learning as much as for just an enjoyment. Then we also have these problems when you have a school which is 4 kilometers away or even 1 kilometer away with no proper roads or transport. The insecurity, the kidnapping, the molestation, the teasing goes on, especially if it is villages, more than one village which is sending the kids to the school on that road, it becomes even more important. In the schools, definitely we have sex harassment, we have teasing, which many girls resent and which we cannot report because then the schools will be stopped, or it will lead to fight in the family and the community. With the result, the girls don't even report about it, quietly they drop off or they become absent in the schools. So child abuse, usually the boys used to get more beaten before, but now we find even the girls are going through the child abuse. Even women teachers beat up the girls, and there is a lot of variety of abuses which take place, and the newspapers report some of them. Many of them are not reported because the girls don't report them at all. Sexual harassment has become a very big issue in the schools, even in developed areas like Bangalore. We have a lot of cases of sexual harassment coming up. Calcutta, we have a lot of cases. Mumbai, we have very many cases, which means not merely the teachers, the sports teachers, not merely the watchmen, the tutors, clerks in the offices. So the girls are exposed to all these men, and there is a lot of cases of sexual harassment taking place in the schools right now, not merely in the adolescent or not merely in the higher education system. There is also the system of child marriages. The Indian average child marriage is still 17 point. The Indian average marriage is 17.6, but this is only upper limit. And most of the places in India, the children do get married much younger, but they don't get reported, or they get falsely, they give a name like 18, because everybody knows the age 18 should be there, but we still have a prevalence of, if not child marriage as such, but definitely adolescent marriages. So, with the result, after class 8, when there is no middle school in the neighborhood, when there is no proper facilities or attraction, the easiest thing is to get them married, and because even having unmarried children at home is a potential insecurity in Indian villages and slums. So, marriage comes in as a way of security and safety for girls. So, parents just get married. They married, particularly if they are working mothers, they do find marriage is a escape from this sort of child assault and other types of insecurities. So, all these act as, in a way, the inhibiting factor. We also have economic factors, more organized economic factors like child labor. Even though the nation has said that, the state has said till the age of 14 their children, there could be no child labor, the same labor laws also allow us to say children can be allowed to assist in family production. In the name of assistance and family production, a lot of children are employed by the parents themselves. If the mother is working in some sort of unorganized sector like beadi rolling or glass making or agriculture or in domestic work, the girls accompany them. So, that is an economic activity. So, a lot of children in the age group of 5 to 14 are working, though we have no child participation rate as such, because children are not supposed to participate in labor or work. So, we do not have any data on that. We also have this household occupation, assistance in family. This is partly because of the poorer levels of the family, partly because of poorer wages of the parents and other elders in the family, the money is not enough. So, they make the children work along with them add on, and this is going unrecognized totally. So, when you value the labor, we do not include the child labor, and the valuation is not given to the child's number of hours and the work which they do, and the child does not get definitely anything in return by way of wages, and so it only goes to the family as a whole. It is a family labor and family income, and child does not get anything. So, it is a double exploitation. One, they are working; second, they are not getting paid; and third, they are deprived of education, health and many other facilities. So, this is very widely prevalent in various parts of India. Whatever is the economic the occupation the family has, the girls invariably get involved even before the age of 14, but definitely after 14. So, with the result, the girls coming for higher education is definitely affected, but even at the primary and middle school it is affected. These are many reasons why we have either poor enrollment, or even if you are enrolled, we have a very high rate of dropout. We all these years believed it is a cultural factor why the girls dropout is more. They come off puberty age, they get menstrual periods, they have to get married, young age marriage. These are the reasons alone which are responsible for girls dropping out. It is not true. It is not definitely 100% true. The economic factors, the role they play at home, the sibling care, the child care facilities they offer at home, all these things are very much more responsible than even the puberty or the menstrual cycles. Many mothers and all have become quite conscious about it. We have overcome that, but we still have the not the cultural factor, but the economic factors which are emerging as very important dominating factors when you do the girl child studies in this country. So, what the state has tried to do is try to bridge some of these gaps. So, it is especially for girls. So, it has given free tuition fees, girls education is free all over India, the few free uniforms, free books and free notebooks. Even the starting the schools within the villages is essentially to help the girls go to the school and come back on time. so that they can be. The recent labor law in fact even says the children can assist protection, but it's in a draft form, it's still not there, passed, but they should go to education along with that. So, the right to education, compulsory right to education, one hopes will send them to school even if they assist in the family protection, because the family work, family chores, family occupation should not come in the way of the school hours. The school hours, they should go to school, but that even is a minimal requirement. School hours is just not school hours is also playground, enjoying, entertainment, which most of our girl children are completely denied because of a cultural factor also, because entertainment is something they just do not have it at home or outside, because they have to run back home, do the household, and also the insecurities around. So, the special education programs have been started by the government. They give a lot of free incentives now. The UGC itself has started special care, special facilities for girls' education at the school level, with a lot of things like playgrounds, games, sports facilities, toys, apart from uniform, books and others. So, the children come out of the schools in rounded personality, not just only going to class and coming out as such. There are also the single girl child scheme, though meant for another purpose. It is still a single girl child, if parents have and they put the child to school, then till the class 12 or even PhD, they get school fees off plus other incentives. You also have some state governments like Haryana and others following their programs, which Amari Beti. So, that for them they give a lot of help. So, a lot of educational benefits have been projected by the government to make the girls first come to the school, then retain them in the school, and then make them emerge out of it as a fully accomplished person capable of either taking a skill and a job or going for higher education in this country. But there is a lot of gap with we still have, and we still are not able to succeed in bringing our aim of 100% literacy in entire India, particularly in the backward regions of India, where the cultural factors and the patriarchal forces are still very strong, where marriage and other customs are still very dominating the education of the girls. With the result, girls' education gets every now and then affected, disrupted in the villages and other places. So, we can have a little summary of what we have had. The despicable picture is 35% of the girls and the women in the country are still out of schools, were out of schools and are out of schools. Some states like Rajasthan, UP, Madhya Pradesh, Orissa, Bihar, Haryana are extremely poor in girls' education, even Andhra is poor in girls' education. That the gap between boys and girls' literacy is still very large, very wide in India. So, even if the education as such has improved, educational development has been high, and a lot of these incentives which are offered are being utilized in the country, and the general figure is going up in every census, that does not mean the girls are benefiting equally out of it. The access of girls to these educational benefits and development is still minimal. With the result, there is a big disparity between the girls' education and the boys' education. So, we had 25% disparity in 91, it somewhat reduced in 1997 to 23. Now, in 2001, it has come down to 16.6. Which means we still have a huge gap between the girls and the boys' education. This has been in spite of the fact, that in India we have adopted a cultural approach of having a lot of girls only education, girls only schools. Girls only schools, girls only colleges, girls only universities, where the teachers or women has come up as a lot in India from the very beginning, because our cultural inhibitions may not send the girls to a co-education school, particularly after a certain age. So, we have started more and more of what you call Kanya Vidyalaya. Lot of beneficiaries are there, lot of benefactors are there, donors are there for Kanya Vidyalaya. But even then, even then, where the 100% is girls intake, 100% teachers are girls intake, even women, even then we find 16.6% as late as 2001. We must see what is the figure a little later. And the educational policy has also promoted the primary school teachers to be women. They said preference should be given in the primary schools to women teachers. The reason mainly is this, not merely that women teachers should get employment, but more than that, women teachers would mean the parents may send the girls to school more willingly, because they get scared of the male teachers and the distance remains the same, the girls don't get access to many things, and so the women teachers are encouraged in the primary classes and the elementary education, so that more girls will be sent to schools as such, apart from the other factors. But still, more girls need to go to the schools and be retained and kept there throughout the day. The social discrimination is still continuing, the family discrimination is still continuing. If there is a scarcity of facility, they will rather send the boys than send the girls. If somebody has to be retained at home because a younger child is sick or unwell, they will keep the girls at home, they will not keep the boys at home. If there are guests in the family, if there is more work to be done at the home, the girls will be asked to keep back and not the boys. So, this sort of a family discrimination of making the girls more and more work in various issues at various times and in emergencies is further disrupting girls' education and girls' failure in the schools, girls not getting really good science and education. These things are all emerging from the family discrimination. In fact, one of the studies have pointed out the curriculum and content of the schools have to improve, methodology has to improve, and the provision particularly of science education to the school girls is still very faulty. Most of the girls only schools, most of the religion dominated schools, especially the Muslim schools, do not offer science education at all, science and technology education at all to the girls in the higher level at all, because they consider still science education as anti-religious and very rational, which should not be encouraged for the girls who have to be more spiritual and religious. All these things need very high level of monitoring from us, high level of government sponsoring, high level of NGOs monitoring it, and we need political and policy level still more, and so we require a lot more economic resources, which is still very sadly lacking. We have never been able to give more than 3.8%, but what is required is really 6.5%. And recent budget has made it even worse for two reasons. One, it has reduced the budget for education as such, not even 3.58. Secondly, they are transferring all this to the state subject from being really the responsibility of both the center and the states, which means we are at the beck and call of the states, and states have no resources. So, one is looking for the future with a dismal feeling, and but somehow we must bring the girls level all over India, especially in the backward states, to 100%, because literacy is an extremely important tool for all the empowerment which we are asking for the women of India. Thank you.
With this note, thank you ma'am, thank you so very much for giving us in-depth knowledge on this very topic. Dear friends, we would be meeting again and we would be talking on higher education for women in our forthcoming lectures. Till then, take care, goodbye, and keep mailing us if you have any queries or if you want to give your feedback regarding this particular lecture, then you can mail us at info.cc@nic.in. Till then, we take your leave. Thank you ma'am, thank you so very much.